You are going to die. This is not speculation. This is the specific fact about your specific existence that has been determining, since the moment of your birth, the specific range of possibilities within which every choice you have ever made has been unfolding. The specific year of your death, the specific cause, the specific conditions are these already determined, waiting somewhere for you to arrive at them, is the specific person you will marry, the specific children you will have or fail to have, the specific career you will pursue, the specific turning point where you will look back and realize that everything changed in that specific moment. Are all of these specific realities already written, inscribed in some specific register of reality from which the unfolding of your life is simply the reading? Or are they genuinely undetermined, waiting for your specific choices to bring them into actuality out of a field of possibilities that your choosing will select among? The question has haunted human consciousness for as long as consciousness has been reflecting on itself. Is the future already written? Is what will happen to you tomorrow, next year, at the moment of your death, already determined in some specific sense that your present deliberation cannot alter? Or is the future genuinely open, waiting for your specific choices to bring one of many possible futures into actuality? The question sounds theological. It sounds philosophical. It sounds like the kind of abstract speculation that can be left to specialists while the practical business of living proceeds without regard to it. It is not abstract. It is the most practical question a conscious being can ask. And the answer that contemporary physics has been quietly delivering through the accumulated experimental evidence of the last 100 years is an answer that transforms what it means to be a person choosing, a person hoping, a person fearing what lies ahead, a person engaged in the specific moment of decision that each moment presents. The answer, in its most startling form, is this: the future exists. It exists now. The specific events that will happen to you tomorrow are already located, in their specific reality, at specific regions of the four-dimensional structure within which all events are embedded. What appears to your present awareness as the open possibility of multiple futures is, from the perspective of the structure itself, the specific perspective of a specific observer whose current location in the structure does not grant direct perceptual access to the regions that lie in what you call the future. The observer experiences uncertainty. The structure is not uncertain. The structure contains, in its complete extent, the specific content of every moment you will ever live. And the physics that has led to this conclusion is not speculative. It is the mainstream interpretation of relativity, confirmed through more than a century of experimental verification that has reshaped every domain of contemporary physics. The foundational argument begins with Einstein's special theory of relativity, published in 1905. The theory, which revolutionized the understanding of space and time, demonstrated that simultaneity is not a feature of objective reality but a feature of specific perspectives within reality. Two events that appear simultaneous to one observer may not appear simultaneous to another observer moving at a different velocity. The classical notion of an objective now, a specific moment of the universe that is the same for all observers, is incompatible with the relativity of simultaneity that Einstein demonstrated. There is no universal present. There are only specific presents, each specific to a specific observer's state of motion, and the mathematical relationships between them are governed by the Lorentz transformations that Einstein derived. Hermann Minkowski, Einstein's former mathematics professor at ETH Zurich, saw the implications of special relativity with extraordinary clarity. In a 1908 lecture in Cologne, Minkowski articulated what has become the standard geometric interpretation of Einstein's theory. Space and time, Minkowski argued, are not two separate realities but two aspects of a single four-dimensional structure space-time. Events are specific points within this structure, located by four coordinates, three spatial, one temporal. The apparent flow of time is a feature of how specific observers traverse the space-time manifold, not a feature of the manifold itself. Henceforth, Minkowski declared, space by itself and time by itself are doomed to fade away into mere shadows, and only a kind of union of the two will preserve an independent reality. The declaration was dramatic. It was also accurate. Contemporary physics has operated within the Minkowski framework for more than a century, and the framework has proven to be an astonishingly precise description of the physical world. The implication for the status of time is immediate and profound. If space-time is a unified four-dimensional structure, then all moments within it, past, present, and future, are equally real. The specific events that occurred yesterday, the specific events that are occurring now, and the specific events that will occur tomorrow are all regions of the same structure, differing from each other in their temporal coordinates but not in their ontological status. What makes a particular moment the present is not some special feature of the moment itself, but the fact that it is the moment in which a particular observer happens to be located. From the perspective of a different observer, a different moment is the present. From the perspective of the structure as a whole, there is no privileged present at all. All moments simply are, distributed across the four-dimensional extent, each with the same reality that the observer's current moment has to the observer now. This view is called the block universe interpretation of relativity. The name captures the central image. The universe is not a process unfolding through time, with the past vanished and the future yet to come. The universe is a block, a four-dimensional structure that contains simultaneously in its own terms every moment that has been, is, and will be. The flow of time, in this view, is a feature of how conscious observers embedded within the structure perceive their own traversal of it, not a feature of the structure itself. Bertrand Russell, in his 1913 paper on the notion of cause, articulated a version of this view. Hermann Weyl, writing in 1949, put it with characteristic precision: the objective world simply is, it does not happen, only to the gaze of my consciousness. Crawling upward along the world line of my body, does a section of this world come to life as a fleeting image in space, which continuously changes in time. The block universe is not the opinion of fringe theorists. It is the view that follows most naturally from the mathematical structure of relativity, and it has been defended by philosophers and physicists of the highest stature for more than a century. The Rietdijk-Putnam argument, formulated independently by the Dutch philosopher Cornelis van Rietdijk in 1966 and by the American philosopher Hilary Putnam in 1967, pushes this picture to a conclusion that many find disturbing. The argument uses the relativity of simultaneity to establish that the future must already exist with the same reality that the past and present possess. The reasoning proceeds through specific steps that, once they are understood, are difficult to avoid. The Minkowski diagram became the standard tool for visualizing relativistic phenomena. In the diagram, time is represented as a vertical axis and space as a horizontal one. The world line of an object, the specific path it traces through space-time as it exists through time, is drawn as a specific curve on the diagram. A stationary object traces a vertical line, moving forward in time while remaining at the same spatial location. A moving object traces a tilted line, moving through both space and time. The past light cone of any event contains all the events that could have causally influenced it. The future light cone contains all the events it could causally influence. The entire manifold is mapped out geometrically, with every event located at its specific point, and all events real within the manifold's own structure. Consider two observers at the same spatial location for simplicity. Two people standing next to each other who are moving at different velocities. For one observer, a specific event that is occurring far away in space is simultaneous with the present moment. For the other observer, moving in a different direction, a different event at the same distant location is simultaneous with the present moment. These two events are not simultaneous with each other by either observer's reckoning, but each is simultaneous with the current moment, according to at least one observer. By the standard principles of special relativity, both simultaneity relations are equally valid. Neither observer is more correct than the other about what is simultaneous with the present moment, because simultaneity is not an objective feature of reality, but a feature of specific perspectives. If we grant that events simultaneous with the present moment are real, which seems necessary to prevent the collapse of any meaningful distinction between reality and unreality, then we must grant that events simultaneous with the present moment from any valid perspective are real. And by suitable choices of velocity, events arbitrarily far into the future of any specific observer can be made simultaneous with the present moment from some valid perspective. The conclusion follows. Events in the future of any specific observer are real. The future, in the specific sense that the past is real, is real. To make the argument concrete, consider the following. Imagine you are on Earth, and your spacecraft is on its way back from Mars, currently approaching at high velocity. Consider a specific event on your friend's home world, a specific conversation happening there. From the reference frame of a stationary observer on Earth, that conversation might be simultaneous with, say, the moment you took a breath this morning. But from the reference frame of your returning spacecraft, moving rapidly toward the source, that same conversation by the specific mathematics of special relativity is simultaneous with a moment several days in your future. Both reference frames are equally valid. Both have equal claim to describe which events are simultaneous with which. And if being simultaneous with a real moment entails being real, then the conversation located several days in your future from your Earth frame perspective is real. The example is not hypothetical in any problematic sense. The relativistic calculations are precise, the effects are measurable, and the logical force of the argument has been recognized by philosophers of physics for 60 years. The argument has been challenged. Specific physicists and philosophers have tried to resist its conclusion by modifying the premises, or by introducing additional structure into relativity that would privilege certain reference frames, or by arguing that the argument proves too much. But the argument has proven remarkably robust. The specific attempts to refute it have generally failed to produce a coherent alternative that preserves both the relativity of simultaneity and the objective reality of the present moment. The most common response among philosophers of physics has been to accept the conclusion the future exists while debating its specific interpretation and implications. The block universe is the standard view, and the standard view entails that the future is not an open possibility waiting to be actualized, but a specific region of the unified structure whose specific content is already, in the relevant sense, determined. This conclusion does not follow from speculative metaphysics. It follows from special relativity combined with a specific reasonable premise about the reality of simultaneous events. Special relativity is not a controversial theory. It is one of the best confirmed theories in the history of science, verified to extraordinary precision by countless experiments over more than a century. The block universe conclusion that follows from it is not a fringe view. It is the view that most naturally emerges from the physics that has been mainstream since Minkowski articulated it in 1908. The experimental foundations of special relativity deserve specific mention. The Michelson-Morley experiment of 1887 established that the speed of light does not depend on the motion of the source. The subsequent experiments on time dilation, the Harfele-Keating atomic clock experiments in 1971, the muon lifetime measurements in cosmic ray detectors, The GPS satellite corrections that must be applied for the system to function accurately have confirmed, to extraordinary precision, that time passes at different rates for observers in different states of motion. The Lorentz transformations that Einstein derived are not abstract mathematical curiosities. They are specific physical relationships that describe how the measurements of space and time vary between observers, and the relationships have been verified with precision that leaves no reasonable doubt about their accuracy. General relativity, Einstein's 1915 extension of special relativity, deepens the picture further. In general relativity, the four-dimensional space-time structure is not flat but curved, with the curvature determined by the distribution of mass and energy. The curvature produces what we perceive as gravity, and the curvature also affects the passage of time. Clocks run more slowly in stronger gravitational fields than in weaker ones, a prediction that has been verified by measuring atomic clocks at different altitudes and, more recently, by comparing atomic clocks at different heights in laboratories within the same building. The experiments have verified time dilation in ways that go far beyond laboratory curiosity. The atomic clocks aboard GPS satellites run faster than ground-based clocks due to their altitude, reduced gravitational time dilation, and slower due to their velocity, increased special relativistic time dilation. The net effect is that the satellite clocks gain approximately 38 microseconds per day relative to ground clocks. Without correcting for this, GPS positioning would drift by approximately 11 kilometers per day, rendering the system useless within hours. The fact that GPS works at all is direct experimental verification that relativistic time dilation is real, measurable, and precisely described by Einstein's equations. The precision is extraordinary. The time difference between a clock on your desk and a clock 1 meter above your desk has been measured, and it matches the predictions of general relativity to within the uncertainty of the measurements. The implications for the block universe view are direct. The four-dimensional structure is not only unified, it is specifically curved, with specific geometric features that determine how observers traverse it and how their measurements of space and time vary across that traversal. The structure is a definite object with definite properties, and the future, within this structure, is a specific region with specific content, determined by the same physical principles that determine the content of the past and present. The delayed choice experiments in quantum mechanics add another dimension to this picture. John Archibald Wheeler proposed, in a series of papers beginning in the late 1970s, a specific thought experiment that pushed the strangeness of quantum measurement into the temporal domain. The standard double-slit experiment, which we have encountered in earlier investigations, shows that quantum particles behave differently depending on whether a measurement is made of which slit they pass through. Wheeler's insight was that the measurement could be made after the particle had passed through the slits, after the particle had supposedly already decided whether to behave as a wave or a particle, and the late measurement would still change the earlier behavior in a way that the conventional understanding of time could not accommodate. Before Kim's experiment, a simpler version had been performed by Carol Alley's group at the University of Maryland in the 1980s, using polarization measurements on delayed choice photons. The results were already suggestive, but the interpretation was contested on various technical grounds. Yoon-Ho Kim and his collaborators performed the decisive experimental version of this proposal in 2000. The experiment, published in Physical Review Letters, used entangled photons to create a specific setup in which the choice of what to measure was made after the photons had completed their journey through the experimental apparatus. The result was unambiguous. The measurement choices made after the photons had already passed changed the pattern of photons recorded at the detector in ways that required, for their explanation, that the photon's earlier behavior was determined by later choices. The specific setup of the Kim experiment is worth describing in some detail. Photons were sent through a double-slit apparatus. Instead of directly detecting which slit each photon passed through, the experimental design used entangled photon pairs. One photon, the signal, went through the slit apparatus, while its entangled partner, the idler, went to a specific set of detectors that could, depending on the experimenter's choice, either record which slit information or not. The critical feature was that the choice about what to measure on the idler photon could be made after the signal photon had already been detected. If the experimenters chose to measure which slit information on the idler, the signal photons produced no interference pattern, even though they had already been detected. If the experimenters chose not to measure which slit information, the signal photons produced an interference pattern. The later choice determined the earlier behavior. The time order that classical physics takes for granted that earlier events determine later events and not vice versa does not apply at the quantum level. Later measurements influence earlier behavior. The implication for the status of the future is specific. If later measurements can determine earlier behavior, then the apparent openness of the future, the sense that what has not yet happened is not yet determined, may be an artifact of our limited perceptual access rather than a feature of reality. The future may be as determinate as the past, and the apparent determination may run in both temporal directions. Future events may be influencing past ones, past events may be shaped by future ones, and the block universe structure, within which these bidirectional influences are coherent, may be the only framework that can accommodate the experimental evidence consistently. The transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics, developed by John Cramer at the University of Washington in the 1980s, provides a specific theoretical framework for these phenomena. Cramer proposed that quantum events involve specific exchanges between emitters and absorbers that are non-temporal in their fundamental character. An emitter produces an alpha wave that propagates forward in time. An absorber produces a confirmation wave that propagates backward in time. The specific quantum event is the specific handshake between these two waves, occurring not at a specific moment, but as a specific transaction that involves both temporal directions. The interpretation has specific explanatory advantages. It handles the delayed choice phenomena, the EPR correlations, and the apparent non-locality of quantum mechanics in ways that the standard Copenhagen interpretation does not. It also implies, in its fundamental structure, that the future is not a blank waiting to be filled in. The future is a specific reality that participates in the specific transactions through which present events occur. The religious traditions have been pointing at this territory for thousands of years. The Christian theology of divine providence, articulated by Augustine in the 4th century and developed by Aquinas in the 13th, describes a reality in which God knows all of time past, present, and future simultaneously, from the vantage of an eternity that contains all temporal moments in a single unified awareness. The divine foreknowledge does not cause specific future events, but the divine foreknowledge entails that specific future events are already real in the divine awareness, already specific, already determinate, already known in their specific content. Boethius, writing The Consolation of Philosophy while awaiting execution in 524 CE, formulated the classical Christian resolution with precision that has influenced theology for 1500 years. Eternity, Boethius wrote, is the simultaneous and complete possession of infinite life. God does not exist within time, seeing events unfold sequentially. God exists in eternity, where all times are simultaneously present to a single unified awareness. The divine foreknowledge of tomorrow's events is not the prediction of what will happen. It is the direct seeing of what, from God's eternal vantage, is already present. Aquinas developed this into the specific doctrine that dominated medieval Christian theology. God sees all times as we see the present, and the divine seeing does not coerce the events any more than our seeing of a present event coerces it to happen. The events unfold through their own causes, which include human choices, but the unfolding, complete in its entirety, is present to the divine awareness in a single eternal moment. The theological framework is not identical to the block universe framework. The theology speaks of a divine awareness that knows. The physics speaks of a geometric structure that contains. But the structural parallel is striking. Both frameworks assert that the future is already specific. Both frameworks assert that the specificity does not, in itself, eliminate the reality of the choices that produce the specific outcomes. The Upanishads, composed in northern India between 800 and 200 BCE, articulated a specific understanding of time and its relationship to ultimate reality that parallels the block universe view with surprising precision. Brahman, the ultimate reality in the Upanishadic framework, is described as beyond time, containing all temporal moments without being subject to their succession. The specific unfolding of events in time is Maya, the specific perspective that embodied consciousness takes on a reality that is, in its deepest nature, timeless. The individual person, bound by their embodied perspective, experiences the specific sequence of past, present, and future. The deeper reality contains all of these simultaneously, in a unified awareness that corresponds, structurally, to what Boethius described as divine eternity, and what contemporary physics describes as the block universe. The Hindu tradition developed this into an elaborate theology of karma, dharma, and moksha, the specific sequence of events in a particular lifetime, the specific suffering encountered, the specific gifts received, the specific relationships formed unfolds according to karma, the informational traces of past actions that determine the specific conditions each being encounters. The present is shaped by the past in specific, precise ways, but the present also shapes the future through the specific choices each being makes within the conditions provided. The framework is neither pure determinism nor pure freedom. It is a specific combination in which the conditions are determined, but the response to the conditions involves genuine agency. The Upanishadic tradition and the later philosophical developments in Vedanta, Samkhya, and other schools have refined this framework across thousands of years, producing sophisticated accounts of how karmic determinism and human agency coexist, that contemporary physics and philosophy are only beginning to approach in their own vocabularies. The Islamic tradition, where we will spend extensive time in the third part of this investigation, has made the question of qadar, divine decree, fate, predestination absolutely central to its theological development. The doctrine of qadar holds that God has written, on the preserved tablet al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, that existed before creation, the specific content of everything that would ever occur. Every action, every thought, every breath of every creature is already inscribed. The theological tradition has developed elaborate frameworks for reconciling this with the specific human responsibility that Islamic ethics requires. The Quranic references to al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet, occur in multiple passages. Surah 85, verses 21 to 22, describe the Quran itself as being inscribed on the preserved tablet, suggesting a reality in which the ultimate source of guidance exists prior to its revelation in time. Surah 13, verse 39, states that God erases and confirms what He wills, with the mother of the book remaining with Him an image of a comprehensive record of all things, from which specific manifestations are unfolded. The Hadith tradition elaborates further. The famous Hadith of the pen describes God commanding the pen to write, at which point the pen inscribed everything that would occur until the day of judgment. The inscription is complete. The unfolding in time reveals what has already been written. The theological difficulty that this creates, how human responsibility can be maintained if all actions are already inscribed, has occupied Muslim theologians for 1400 years, producing a rich intellectual tradition of responses that we will examine in detail. The Mu'tazilites emphasized human freedom. The Jabariya denied it. The Ash'arites developed the doctrine of kasb acquisition, in which God creates actions while humans acquire moral responsibility for them. The debates are sophisticated and have been developed across 12 centuries. And the specific question that drove them is the same question that Rietdijk-Putnam raised from the perspective of contemporary physics. If the future is already real, what is the status of the choices that seem to actualize it? The second part of this investigation will engage the free will problem directly. Libet's 1983 experiments suggested that conscious decisions are preceded by measurable brain activity that begins before the subject reports having made the decision. Haynes and Soon's 2008 fMRI studies pushed this backward, showing that brain activity predicting a specific choice appears 7 to 10 seconds before the conscious decision. The specific findings have been interpreted in radically different ways by different researchers. Some have concluded that free will is an illusion, that specific brain processes determine the actions we experience as our choices. Others have argued that the brain activity is part of the decision-making process rather than the cause of it, that the conscious experience of deciding is the brain's integration of its own deliberative processes, not a separable ghost in the machine that could produce actions independently of the neural substrate. We will examine the specific neuroscience that suggests choices are determined by brain activity before they reach conscious awareness. We will examine the quantum mechanisms that challenge classical determinism. We will consider whether the apparent reality of free will is compatible with the apparent reality of the future that the block universe framework requires. And we will begin the journey toward a specific resolution, one that the traditions have been articulating for centuries, and that contemporary physics is beginning to formulate in its own vocabulary. What the physics has established at this point in its development is a specific structural claim about the nature of reality. Reality is a four-dimensional structure. All moments within that structure are real. The specific events that will occur in the future of any specific observer are real, located at their specific coordinates within the structure. The future, in this specific sense, already exists. The future is written. What this means and what it does not mean is the question that transforms everything. This does not mean what you think it means. And the specific implications for how you live, how you choose, and how you face what comes transform what it means to be the specific being that you are. If the future is already written, then what exactly is happening when you deliberate about a decision? When you sit in the coffee shop considering whether to take the job offer, what is taking place? The deliberation feels genuine. The sense that the outcome depends on what you decide feels genuine. The experience of weighing options, anticipating consequences, and finally choosing has the specific phenomenology that distinguishes choice from passive occurrence. And yet, if the physics is correct, if the future you will actually inhabit is already located at its specific coordinates in the unified structure, then the choice you seem to be making is, in some specific sense, a choice whose outcome has already been determined. The deliberation is not producing a future that was not already specific. The deliberation is discovering the future that is already specific. This is the paradox at the heart of the fate question, and it is made more acute, not less, by the contemporary neuroscience of decision-making. The neuroscience has been producing findings across the last 4 decades that challenge the common sense view of conscious choice in ways that complicate the fate problem rather than resolving it. Even setting aside the relativistic physics entirely, The neuroscience has been suggesting that the specific choices we experience as our own conscious decisions are determined by neural processes that precede and therefore, in some specific sense, cause the conscious experience of deciding. Benjamin Libet's experiments at the University of California, San Francisco, conducted in the early 1980s, established the foundational finding. Libet asked subjects to perform a specific simple action, flexing a finger or a wrist at a moment of their own choosing. The subjects were asked to report, as precisely as possible, the moment at which they became aware of deciding to perform the action. While the subjects were doing this, Libet measured two things. He measured the electrical activity in the subjects' brains using electroencephalography, and he measured the specific moment at which the muscle movement actually began. The results were startling. A specific pattern of brain activity, which Libet called the readiness potential, began approximately 550 milliseconds before the muscle movement. The conscious awareness of deciding, by the subject's own reports, occurred approximately 200 milliseconds before the movement. The gap between the onset of the readiness potential and the conscious awareness of deciding was approximately 350 milliseconds. The finding was interpreted by Libet himself, and more aggressively by subsequent researchers, as suggesting that the decision-making process begins unconsciously in the brain's electrical activity before the conscious experience of deciding occurs. The conscious decision is not the cause of the action. It is a report, arriving late, of a decision that has already been made by neural processes that operated below the threshold of awareness. Libet himself was careful about this interpretation. He proposed that consciousness might still have the capacity to veto unconscious decisions during the final 200 milliseconds before the movement. Libet's original papers, published across the 1970s and 1980s, documented this phenomenon across hundreds of trials with multiple subjects. The specific finding was robust across replication attempts. The readiness potential was not an experimental artifact. It was a real neural signal that preceded both the conscious experience of deciding and the motor execution of the action. Libet's interpretation was careful precisely because he recognized the disturbing implication. If the unconscious brain had already initiated the action before the conscious experience of deciding occurred, then the conscious experience was not causing the action. It was reporting an action whose initiation had already taken place. The conscious will might not initiate actions, but it might have the power to prevent them. This veto theory has been debated and partially supported by subsequent research, but the specific finding that the initial decision-making process is unconscious has held up across decades of replication. John Dillon Haynes and his colleagues, working at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences in Leipzig, extended Libet's findings dramatically in a 2008 study published in Nature Neuroscience. Haynes used functional magnetic resonance imaging rather than electroencephalography, which allowed him to identify specific brain regions involved in the decision-making process and to track their activity with greater spatial precision. The subjects were asked to make a specific choice to press either a left or a right button at a moment of their own choosing. Haynes's results pushed the timeline of unconscious decision-making back dramatically. Specific patterns in the prefrontal and parietal cortex predicted, with accuracy significantly above chance, the subject's choice up to 10 seconds before the conscious decision. Let that register. 10 seconds before you experience the moment of deciding to press a button, the decision is already visible in your brain. Not the preparation for the decision itself. The specific outcome, left or right, can be read off your brain activity before any part of you is aware that you are about to choose. 10 seconds. Before the subject had any conscious sense of which button they were going to press, specific brain regions had already committed to the outcome. The Haynes results have been replicated and extended. Soon, Brass, Haynes, and Haynes published follow-up studies that refined the methodology and confirmed the specific findings. Other researchers, using different paradigms and different imaging techniques, have produced convergent results. The specific details vary. The predictive accuracy is not perfect. The brain regions involved differ across different types of decisions, but the core finding is robust. The specific content of a conscious decision is determined by brain activity that precedes the conscious awareness of deciding by substantial intervals. Robert Sapolsky, the Stanford neuroscientist, has taken these findings to their most radical conclusion in his 2023 book, Determined: A Science of Life Without Free Will. Sapolsky is not a fringe figure. He is a professor at Stanford, a MacArthur Genius Fellowship recipient, and one of the most respected neuroscientists of his generation. His previous book, Behave, was widely considered one of the best integrations of neuroscience, psychology, and evolutionary biology to appear in the 21st century. When Sapolsky, from this position, argues that free will cannot survive the neuroscience, the argument commands attention that fringe positions do not receive. Sapolsky argues, across 500 pages of accumulated evidence, that the conventional notion of free will cannot survive the neuroscience. Every action a person takes, Sapolsky contends, is the specific product of specific preceding causes: biological, psychological, environmental, developmental, genetic, that the person did not choose and could not have chosen differently. The sense that we make free decisions is, in Sapolsky's framework, a specific illusion produced by a brain that lacks access to its own causal history. We feel free because we do not see the causes of our choices. We are not free because the choices are, in their specific content, determined by the causes we do not see. Sapolsky's position is controversial, but it is not fringe. It represents one pole of a debate that has been developing among neuroscientists, philosophers, and psychologists for several decades. The other pole is occupied by researchers who argue that the Libet and Haynes findings, while genuine, do not establish what Sapolsky claims they establish. The readiness potential may be a specific preparatory signal that does not actually determine the decision the brain may be preparing to be ready to choose, rather than having already chosen. The predictive accuracy of the fMRI studies, while above chance, is far from perfect. The brain activity biases the eventual choice rather than fully determining it. The subjective experience of deciding, while demonstrably not the initiator of neural activity, may still be a specific integrative process that shapes the decision, even as it also reflects the decision being made. The philosophers Alfred Meles at Florida State University and Daniel Dennett at Tufts have argued for versions of this position. The free will that the neuroscience challenges, they contend, is not the free will that the philosophical tradition has actually been defending. The philosophical tradition has generally not claimed that free decisions are uncaused events that arise from nothing. It has claimed that free decisions are specific kinds of caused events, events caused by the specific deliberative processes of the specific agent, rather than by external forces that bypass the agent's deliberation. If the neural processes that precede conscious awareness are the agent's own deliberative processes operating below the threshold of awareness, then the agent is still the cause of the decision, and the decision is still, in the relevant sense, free. This is the position philosophers call compatibilism. Compatibilism holds that free will and determinism are compatible, that the specific kind of free will that matters morally and practically does not require indeterminism in the fundamental physics. A compatibilist can accept the block universe, the Libet findings, and the Sapolsky-style determinism without concluding that free will is an illusion. The free will that compatibilism defends is a specific kind of agency, the capacity to act on one's own deliberative processes. free from certain specific kinds of external compulsion that is entirely consistent with those deliberative processes being themselves causally determined. But there is another possibility that the compatibilist position does not fully engage. Quantum mechanics introduces a specific form of indeterminism into physical processes that classical physics does not allow. At the quantum level, specific events are genuinely probabilistic, not merely unpredictable due to limited information, but genuinely undetermined until they occur. Specific atoms decay at specific times that cannot be predicted even in principle. Specific photons pass through specific slits in specific ways that no fuller theory could predict. Specific measurements produce specific outcomes whose specific content is not determined by anything preceding the measurement. The quantum indeterminism is real. It is not an artifact of our ignorance. It is a specific feature of physical reality. And this raises the question of whether quantum indeterminism plays a role in biological systems, particularly in the brain, in ways that could be relevant to the free will question. Robert Kane, a philosopher at the University of Texas at Austin, has developed the most sophisticated account of how quantum indeterminism could provide the physical basis for genuine libertarian free will. In his book, The Significance of Free Will, Kane argues that specific moments in a person's deliberative life, what he calls self-forming actions, involve genuine indeterminism at the level of neural processes. During these moments, the outcome is not fully determined by the prior causes. The specific agent, faced with competing motivations that have approximately equal pull, actively participates in the resolution of the indeterminism in a way that constitutes the agent's genuine authorship of the choice. Kane's framework is technical and has been the subject of extensive philosophical critique. Kane's self-forming actions are rare in any specific life, perhaps a few dozen specifically formative moments across an entire lifetime. These are the moments when a person faces a specific choice in which their competing motivations genuinely conflict, in which neither motivation fully dominates, and in which the specific resolution of the conflict shapes the specific character the person will have going forward. A specific moment in which a young person decides whether to pursue the risky artistic vocation or the safer professional path. A specific moment in which a person decides whether to cheat on a defining moral test. A specific moment in which a person, under specific stress, decides whether to respond to injury with vengeance or with forgiveness. Kane argues that these specific moments involve genuine quantum indeterminism at the neural level, and that the specific agent's active participation in the resolution of the indeterminism is what constitutes the genuine authorship of the choice. But it represents a specific attempt to reconcile genuine free will with contemporary physics in a way that neither the compatibilists nor the hard determinists have matched. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff have proposed a specific mechanism for quantum indeterminism in the brain through their orchestrated objective reduction theory. The theory, which we have encountered in earlier investigations, proposes that specific quantum processes occur in the microtubules of neurons, cylindrical protein structures, whose specific quantum properties may be relevant to consciousness and decision-making. The quantum coherence in microtubules, the theory proposes, is the physical substrate for consciousness, and the objective reduction events that occur within this coherence are moments at which quantum indeterminism is resolved in specific ways. These moments are, in the theory, the specific physical correlates of conscious experience and, potentially, of free decision-making. The theory is controversial. It has specific technical difficulties that its critics have emphasized, but recent experimental findings, particularly the 2022 research by Bandyopadhyay and collaborators on quantum coherence in microtubules, which we examined in the consciousness investigation, have provided specific empirical support for the theory's core claims. Henry Stapp, a theoretical physicist who worked at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, has developed a specific framework that integrates quantum mechanics with the phenomenology of conscious choice. STAP's framework distinguishes between two specific processes. Process 2 is the deterministic evolution of the quantum state, according to the Schrödinger equation. Process 1 is the specific act of questioning the specific moment at which a conscious observer asks a specific question of the quantum system and thereby collapses the wave function into a specific outcome. Process 1, in STAP's framework, is not determined by process 2. It is the specific contribution of consciousness to the physical process, the specific moment at which conscious choice participates in the actualization of reality. The specific mathematical structure of process 1 has been developed in STAP's technical papers across several decades. The process is not arbitrary. It involves specific constraints, specific probabilities, specific relationships to the prior quantum state. But within these constraints, the specific question asked, which depends on the specific conscious intention of the specific observer, is genuinely indeterminate relative to the prior physical state. The choice of which question to ask is not dictated by physics. It is the contribution of consciousness. And the specific answer that emerges, once the question has been asked, is determined by the probability distribution that the quantum state provides. Consciousness, in STAP's framework, is neither outside physics nor reducible to physics. It is a specific participant in the physical processes, contributing the specific selective attention that determines what specific question each moment asks. STAP's framework provides a specific physical interpretation of free will, in which consciousness is neither an epiphenomenon nor an illusion, but a specific physical agency that participates in the determination of outcomes that quantum mechanics alone does not fix. The integration of these various approaches produces a specific picture that is more subtle than either the hard determinism of Sapolsky or the naive libertarianism that the compatibilists rightly reject. The picture goes like this. The future exists, in some specific sense, in the four-dimensional block structure that relativity describes. The specific content of the future includes the specific choices that specific agents will make. These choices are not imposed on the agents from outside. They are the specific choices the agents will make, arising from the specific deliberative processes of the specific agents. And the deliberative processes involve, at their deepest levels, specific quantum events that are not fully determined by prior causes. The determination comes through the deliberation, not around it. The agent's choice is genuine. It is not the illusion of choice that hard determinism would suggest. But the choice is also specific. It is one specific choice among the possibilities, and that specific choice is what the block universe contains at the specific location in the structure that corresponds to the moment of deciding. The apparent paradox dissolves when we recognize that the specificity of the future does not require that the future be externally imposed. The future can be specific precisely because the specific choices of specific agents make it specific. The agent's choice is part of the specific content of the future. The agent is not forced to choose what the future contains. The agent's choice is what the future contains. The determination runs through the agent, not around the agent. And this is what the contemplative traditions have been articulating for millennia in various vocabularies that we will examine in the third part of this investigation. Christian theology, across its most rigorous thinkers, has been wrestling with essentially this question throughout its history. Augustine in The City of God argued that divine foreknowledge does not contradict human freedom because God's knowledge is not temporal. It is the knowledge of all times in a single eternal present, and this knowledge is compatible with the temporal unfolding of free choices within created time. Aquinas refined the argument with characteristic precision. God knows contingent future events not by inferring them from their causes, which would turn them into necessities, but by directly seeing them in their own actualization, which for God is present rather than future. The theological framework that articulates this most precisely in the Western tradition is what philosophers of religion call Molinism, after the 16th century Jesuit theologian Luis de Molina. Molinism proposes that God possesses what theologians call middle knowledge, knowledge of what any specific creature would freely choose to do in any specific circumstance. God knows, for any possible situation you could be placed in, what you would freely choose to do. This knowledge is not the determination of your choice. It is the knowledge of what your free choice would be. And God, with this knowledge, can arrange the actual world such that specific things occur by freely arranging the circumstances such that the free choices of free creatures produce the specific outcomes that God wills. The framework preserves both the specificity of the future God knows what will happen and the genuine freedom of the creatures whose choices fill in the specific content. Molinism has been debated within Christian theology for 400 years. The specific objection that Molinism faces, called the grounding objection, is that middle knowledge requires a specific truth about what any possible creature would freely choose in any possible circumstance, and critics argue there is no clear ontological ground for these truths if the choices are genuinely free. The Molinist responds that the truths are grounded in the specific nature of the free creatures themselves. Each possible person has specific dispositions, specific values, specific patterns of response that determine what they would choose in various circumstances, while still leaving the choice genuinely free in each specific instance. The debate continues in contemporary philosophy of religion, with sophisticated defenders and sophisticated critics producing increasingly refined arguments. Its specific merits and difficulties are technical, but the structural insight it provides is important. The specificity of the future does not require the elimination of free choice, because the free choice itself can be part of what makes the future specific. The quantum mechanical analog is structurally similar. The future state of the universe, in some specific sense, is determined, but the determination includes the specific contributions of the specific conscious agents who will make specific choices. The choices are not external to the determination. They are, so to speak, constituents of the determination. The future is fixed. The choices that fix it are genuine. The apparent tension between these claims is itself the product of a specific confusion, the confusion of treating fixity and agency as opposites, when they are in fact complementary features of a single unified reality. And the apparent contradiction between these two claims is the appearance that arises when we try to think of the future as something that happens to agents, rather than as something that agents participate in producing. Before pressing further, we must engage a specific philosophical worry. If the future is specific, how can the agent's deliberation be genuine deliberation? Deliberation presupposes, it seems, that the outcome is not yet fixed, that the deliberator is actually working out which of several possibilities to actualize. If the outcome is already fixed, what is the deliberation doing? Is it not merely going through the motions of a decision whose content was already set? The response to this worry requires careful attention to what deliberation specifically is. Deliberation is a specific process that involves considering alternatives, weighing consequences, integrating values, and arriving at a conclusion. The process is a specific physical process that takes place in a specific nervous system over a specific interval of time. The process has specific content, specific thoughts, specific feelings, specific integrations, and the process produces a specific output, the specific choice that specifically emerges from the specific deliberation. The choice is not produced by external forces that bypass the deliberation. The choice is produced by the deliberation. The deliberation is what does the choosing. That the specific outcome is specific does not mean the deliberation was not real. The specificity of the outcome is the specificity of the deliberation that produced it. This brings us to a crucial distinction that has been implicit throughout the argument. There is a difference between predetermination and specificity. Predetermination implies that specific causes from outside the agent force specific outcomes. Specificity implies only that specific outcomes are the specific outcomes they are. The block universe requires specificity. It does not require predetermination. The specific events that will occur are specific because they are what they are, not because specific external causes have forced them to be what they are. And the specific content of the specific events includes the specific contributions of specific agents whose specific choices are genuine and whose specific participation in the specific outcomes is real. The distinction may seem abstract. Its practical implications are immediate. Consider anxiety about the future, the specific dread of what might happen tomorrow, next year, at the end of your life. This dread presupposes that the future is somehow threatening, that specific bad outcomes are lurking ahead waiting to descend on you. But if the future is already specific, and if your specific choices are part of what makes it specific, then the anxiety is misdirected. The anxiety treats the future as an external agent that might do things to you. The actual structure is different. The future is specific. It contains the specific outcomes that will occur, and those specific outcomes include the specific choices you will make and the specific ways in which your specific present orientations will participate in producing the specific future that the structure contains. Consider regret. The specific pain of wishing you had chosen differently presupposes that your previous choices were genuinely open, that you could have chosen differently, and that the different choice would have produced a different outcome. If the block universe is correct, and if your specific choice at the specific previous moment was part of the specific content of the specific past region of the structure, then you chose what you chose. You were not forced to choose it by external causes that bypassed your deliberation. You chose it as the specific agent you specifically were at the specific moment. And the regret, while emotionally real, is grounded in a specific conceptual error, the error of imagining that the past was genuinely open in a way that your present retrospection would require to make the alternative choice genuinely possible. The Buddhist tradition has articulated this insight with characteristic precision through the doctrine of pratitya-samutpada, dependent origination that we have encountered in earlier investigations. Every event arises in dependence on specific conditions. The specific conditions that existed at the moment of your previous choice included the specific mental states, the specific desires, the specific fears, the specific information available to you. Given those specific conditions, the choice you made was the specific choice that would arise from those conditions. A different choice would have required different conditions. The different conditions did not exist. This is not a claim that the agent lacks freedom. It is a claim about what freedom specifically is. The agent is free in the sense that the choice arises from the agent's specific deliberative processes rather than being imposed by external coercion. The agent is not free in the sense of being able to choose from a specific set of conditions, a choice that would not arise from those specific conditions. Freedom, in the Buddhist analysis, is not a magical capacity to transcend causation. It is the specific capacity to act in accordance with one's own nature, where that nature itself is specifically what one has become through prior causes. The different choice was therefore not genuinely available in the specific circumstances. The regret presupposes an alternative that was never actually possible under the specific conditions that actually existed. This is not fatalism. Fatalism holds that specific outcomes will occur regardless of what the agent does. The block universe view, properly understood, holds the opposite. Specific outcomes will occur precisely because of what the agent does. The agent's specific choices are not irrelevant to what happens. They are constitutive of what happens. The specific future is specific because the specific agent will specifically choose the specific actions that produce the specific outcomes. This reframes the entire question of what the future is. It is not a threat looming ahead. It is not a predetermined script that the agent is forced to follow. It is the specific unfolding that the specific agents, specific choices, specifically produce. The agent is the specific author of the specific future, in the same sense that a writer is the specific author of a specific novel. Not because the writer could have written a different novel, the specific writer, with the specific history, writes the specific book that emerges, but because the specific writer's specific contributions are what specifically constitute the specific book that results. Take away the agent's choices, and the specific future would be different, would, in fact, not exist, because the specific future includes those specific choices as constituent elements. The third part of this investigation will take us into the traditions. We will see how the Christian tradition has wrestled with divine foreknowledge and human freedom across 2,000 years of theological development. We will see how the Islamic tradition has developed the doctrine of qadar and the related concept of kasb across 14 centuries of theological sophistication. We will see how the Buddhist and Hindu traditions have articulated specific frameworks for understanding the relationship between karma and agency. We will see how this framework transforms specific features of lived experience, the anxiety about what lies ahead, the regret over what lies behind, the sense of being caught between forces you did not choose and did not make. And we will see how the convergence of these traditions with the contemporary physics produces a specific picture of fate and freedom that is neither the naive libertarianism of the popular understanding nor the hard determinism that the neuroscience alone might suggest, but a specific, more subtle framework that captures what the deepest investigations of reality have been pointing at. The contemplative traditions have been developing answers to the fate question for longer than physics has existed as a discipline. The specific answers differ across traditions in their vocabularies, their emphases, and their metaphysical frameworks. But the deepest formulations of each tradition converge, across radical differences in cultural context, on a specific structural claim that parallels with remarkable precision what contemporary physics has been articulating. The future is, in some specific sense, already real. Human agency is, in some specific sense, genuine. And the apparent contradiction between these two claims dissolves when the specific frameworks are articulated carefully enough. The Christian tradition has wrestled with this problem across 2,000 years of theological development, producing what may be the most extensive body of systematic reflection on the relationship between divine foreknowledge and human freedom in any tradition. The problem arose early in Christian history. If God knows what I will do tomorrow, is my choice tomorrow genuinely free? If my choice is not free, how can I be held morally responsible for it? And if my choice is free, how can God know what it will be before I make it? The problem has been articulated, refined, and addressed by specific thinkers across every century of Christian intellectual history, and the accumulated reflection constitutes one of the great achievements of Western philosophical theology. Augustine of Hippo, writing at the turn of the 5th century, produced the foundational engagement with the problem. In Book 5 of The City of God, Augustine confronted the apparent contradiction directly. If God foreknows the future, Augustine argued, then what God foreknows must come to pass. Otherwise God would not be foreknowing, but merely guessing. But the inevitability of what will happen does not eliminate the freedom of the choices that produce it. Augustine was responding to the pagan philosopher Cicero, who had argued that divine foreknowledge and human freedom were incompatible and had concluded, preferring to preserve freedom, that God must not foreknow future free actions. Augustine considered this preservation of freedom at the cost of divine omniscience to be a catastrophic theological error. If God cannot know the future, God is not the God that Christian theology requires. The challenge was to preserve both omniscience and freedom, and Augustine accepted the challenge. Augustine's specific move was to distinguish between two kinds of necessity. There is the necessity of compulsion, what happens because external forces force it to happen. And there is the necessity of simple consequence, what happens because it is what happens, regardless of whether anything compels it. The necessity that divine foreknowledge entails is the second kind, not the first. God knows that you will freely choose what you will freely choose. The knowledge does not compel the choice. The choice, freely made, is what the knowledge knows. Boethius, writing The Consolation of Philosophy in 524 CE, while awaiting execution under Theodoric the Ostrogoth, refined the argument through a specific metaphysical move that has shaped Christian theology ever since. The problem arises, Boethius argued, because we imagine God as knowing the future the way we would know it, inferring it from its causes, projecting it forward from the present. But God does not know the future that way. God exists in eternity, which is not a very long time, but the simultaneous possession of all time. From God's perspective, your future choice is not future. It is present, directly seen in its own actualization, just as we see present events in their own actualization. The divine seeing does not cause the event any more than our seeing of a present event causes it. The event is what it is, freely produced by its own causes, and the divine awareness simply sees it in its specific reality. Thomas Aquinas, writing in the 13th century, developed this into the specific technical framework that dominated medieval Christian theology. Aquinas distinguished between God's knowledge of necessary truths, which are what they are independently of particular contingent actualities, and God's knowledge of contingent truths, which include what specific agents will freely choose. The specific mode of God's knowledge of contingent truths is vision, not inference. God does not deduce that you will make a specific choice from the specific conditions preceding the choice. God sees the choice in its own actualization, which for God is eternally present. The distinction allowed Aquinas to preserve both divine omniscience and human freedom. God knows every specific future choice, but the knowledge is compatible with the choice being genuinely free, because the knowledge is not produced by deterministic inference from prior causes. The Protestant Reformation complicated this picture in specific ways. Martin Luther and John Calvin emphasized, much more strongly than their Catholic predecessors, the specific doctrine of predestination, the teaching that God has specifically elected certain individuals for salvation, and specifically not others, and that the election is not based on foreseen human merit, but on God's sovereign will. Calvin's specific formulation in the Institutes of the Christian Religion made this doctrine central to Reformed theology in a way that Augustine had only hinted at. The Reformers' specific doctrine rested on specific biblical passages, Paul's letter to the Romans in particular, that emphasized God's sovereign election. Romans 9 describes God choosing Jacob over Esau before either was born, not based on anything either had done, but purely on God's sovereign will. For Calvin, this passage and others like it established that salvation is entirely God's work, with specific individuals chosen for reasons known only to God, and specific others passed over for the same inscrutable reasons. The doctrine produced specific controversies across Protestant Christianity that continue to the present day. Jacob Arminius, in the early 17th century, developed a specific alternative framework, emphasizing that God's election is conditional on foreseen faith. The Synod of Dort in 1618-19 codified the Calvinist rejection of Arminianism, and the resulting theological divisions between Calvinist and Arminian positions on predestination and free will continue to shape Protestant denominations 4 centuries later. Luis de Molina, the 16th century Jesuit theologian we encountered in the previous part of this investigation, developed the most sophisticated attempt to preserve both divine sovereignty and genuine human freedom. Molina's specific innovation was the concept of middle knowledge, God's knowledge of what any possible free creature would freely do in any possible circumstance. God, possessing this knowledge, can arrange the actual world such that specific divine purposes are accomplished through the specific free choices of specific creatures. The creatures are not forced to make specific choices. God simply knows what each creature, being the specific creature it is, would freely choose in the specific circumstances the creature faces. The framework is technical, and the debates over its coherence continue in contemporary analytic philosophy of religion. But the structural achievement is impressive. Molinism preserves the specific reality of the future which Christian theology requires, without eliminating the specific freedom of the choices that populate it. Meister Eckhart, preaching in early 14th century Germany, approached the problem from the mystical rather than the scholastic angle. Eckhart's central teaching was that the deepest reality of the human soul is not separate from the deepest reality of God. The soul, in its ground, participates in the divine eternity that contains all times in a single present. When the soul recognizes its own deepest nature, the distinction between what the soul will choose and what God has known collapses. The soul's choice and God's knowledge are not 2 separate events that need to be reconciled. They are 2 aspects of a single reality that the soul can directly perceive when it has awakened to its own deepest ground. The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me, Eckhart preached. And this teaching applies not merely to the question of observation, but to the question of choice. Eckhart's specific scandal, in the eyes of his papal inquisitors, was that he seemed to dissolve the separation between the human and the divine in ways that classical Catholic theology was uncomfortable with. But his teaching was not the elimination of human agency. It was the specific recognition that human agency, in its deepest ground, is not separate from the divine agency that sustains all reality. The choosing through which you shape your life is the same choosing through which God eternally knows what your life will be. The Islamic tradition has made the question of qadar, divine decree and predestination, absolutely central to its theological development. The centrality is not accidental. The Quran contains specific passages that emphasize both divine sovereignty over all events and specific human moral responsibility. Reconciling these 2 emphases has been the task of Islamic theology from its earliest centuries, and the sophistication of the resulting tradition is extraordinary, comparable in its depth and precision to the Christian engagement with the same problem, though developed along somewhat different lines. The doctrine of al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet, provides the specific metaphysical framework within which the Islamic discussion takes place. The tablet is described in Quranic passages as the primordial record in which all things are written. Surah 85-20, 1, 2. 2 describes the Quran itself as being inscribed on the preserved tablet. Surah 13:39 states that God erases and confirms what He wills, and with Him is the mother of the book. The Hadith tradition elaborates the imagery. The famous Hadith of the pen, preserved in multiple collections, describes God commanding the pen to write, at which point the pen inscribed everything that would occur until the day of judgment. The pen asked what it should write, and God said, "Write what will be until the day of resurrection." The pen wrote until everything was inscribed. The Islamic tradition has paid careful attention to the specific moment of the writing. The pen was the first thing God created, according to the Hadith, created before anything else, commanded to write before any other event occurred. The writing of the tablet preceded the creation of the physical world. Every specific event that would ever occur in the physical world was inscribed before the world began, and the specific content of the inscription is complete and precise, not general patterns, but specific events, specific persons, specific choices, specific outcomes. The inscription is complete. It is not a record of what has occurred, but a specification of what will occur, written before the creation of the physical world. The theological schools that emerged in the early centuries of Islam differed specifically on how to reconcile this doctrine with human moral responsibility. The Qadariyya, whose name derives from qadar itself, emphasized human free will, arguing that God's justice requires that humans be genuinely responsible for their actions and that genuine responsibility requires genuine freedom. The Jabariyya, at the opposite extreme, emphasized divine determination so strongly that they effectively denied human agency. Humans are compelled by God to do what they do, with no genuine freedom involved. Both positions were eventually judged heretical by the mainstream tradition, which sought a specific middle path. The Asharite school, founded by Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari in the 10th century, developed the doctrine of kasb acquisition that became the dominant position in Sunni Islam. According to kasb, God is the sole creator of all actions. Every specific action, whether good or evil, is directly created by God, but humans acquire the actions through their specific intentions and specific efforts. The acquisition is what makes the human morally responsible for the action, even though God is the ultimate cause of the actions coming into existence. The doctrine has been criticized from various angles for its philosophical coherence, but it has remained the dominant Sunni position for 1,000 years, and the specific subtlety of its formulation reflects sustained theological effort to preserve both divine sovereignty and human responsibility. Al-Ghazali, the 11th century Persian theologian whose influence on Islamic thought is difficult to overstate, developed the Asharite framework with philosophical sophistication in works like The Incoherence of the Philosophers and The Revival of the Religious Sciences. Al-Ghazali argued that the apparent contradiction between divine decree and human freedom dissolves when we understand the specific nature of divine action. God is not an external agent forcing human actions from outside. God is the continuous ground of all existence, sustaining every moment of being, including the specific moments in which human agents make specific choices. The human choice is not separate from God's sustaining action. It is a specific mode of God's sustaining action through which specific creatures exercise specific agency within the specific world God continuously creates. The specific Islamic saying that captures this synthesis is preserved in the Hadith: "Tie your camel and trust in Allah." A man reportedly asked the Prophet whether he should leave his camel untied and trust God to protect it, or tie it and then trust God. The Prophet's answer integrated both elements: tie the camel, then trust God. The specific effort and the specific reliance are not opposed, they are complementary. Tawakkul, reliance on God, is not abandonment of effort. It is the specific recognition that one's own efforts take place within God's sustaining presence, and that the specific outcomes depend on both. Ibn Arabi, the 13th century Sufi metaphysician, pushed this synthesis to its most radical conclusion. In Ibn Arabi's framework, the deepest reality is a single existence, wadat al-wujud, the unity of being which manifests itself through specific creaturely forms. The specific choices of specific creatures are specific modes through which the one existence expresses itself in specific circumstances. The choice is not imposed on the creature from outside the one existence. The choice is not produced by the creature in independence from the one existence. The choice is the specific self-manifestation of the one existence through the specific form that the specific creature provides. The apparent contradiction between divine decree and human freedom dissolves because there is no duality of divine and human agency. There is one agency, the one existence manifesting itself in specific forms, one of which is the specific creature making the specific choice. This is a radical framework, and it has been controversial within Islamic theology, but it represents a specific, deep engagement with the problem that pushes the classical categories toward their dissolution. Rumi, Ibn Arabi's younger contemporary, expressed this insight through his poetry. You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop. The relationship of the individual choice to the totality of reality is not the relationship of a small part to a large whole. The individual choice, in its specific particularity, expresses the totality. It is the totality, manifesting through this specific perspective in this specific moment. Rumi's poetry does not provide technical philosophical arguments, but it articulates the specific phenomenology that the technical frameworks point at. When you experience yourself choosing, you are experiencing the specific way in which the totality of reality expresses itself through the specific form you are. The choice is not yours in isolation from the whole. It is also not the whole's in isolation from you. It is the specific juncture at which the whole and you are the same specific event. The Buddhist tradition approaches the question through frameworks that differ significantly from the Abrahamic traditions, but that converge, in their deepest formulations, on similar insights. The central framework is pratitya-samutpada dependent origination, which we have encountered in earlier investigations. Every event arises in dependence on specific conditions. Nothing exists independently. The specific conditions at any moment produce the specific events of that moment, and those events become the conditions for subsequent events. The causal web is comprehensive, and within this web, the specific choices of specific agents are specific events that arise from specific conditions and produce specific subsequent events. The Buddhist analysis does not treat this as a denial of freedom. It treats it as a specific analysis of what freedom specifically is. The agent is not free in the sense of being able to produce choices that do not arise from the conditions that exist. That would be incoherent. A choice arising from no specific conditions would be an arbitrary occurrence with no specific connection to the specific agent. The agent is free in the sense that the choice arises from the specific deliberative processes of the specific agent, rather than being imposed by external forces that bypass the agent. The agent's deliberative processes are part of the causal web, but they are the specific part that specifically constitutes the agent's agency. Freedom is not transcendence of causation. Freedom is a specific mode of causation in which the agent's own nature is the specific proximate cause of the specific outcome. The concept of cetana, intention or volition, occupies a specific role in this framework. Cetana is specifically identified as the locus of kamic responsibility, the specific intentional content of an action, not merely its external form, is what generates kamic consequences. Two people can perform outwardly similar actions, but if their intentions differ, the kamic consequences will differ. This is a specific framework in which moral responsibility is preserved through the specific reality of intentional content, even though the intentional content itself arises from specific prior conditions. The Buddhist tradition developed this analysis in elaborate detail across the Abhidhamma literature, producing specific accounts of how various factors combine to produce specific intentions, and how specific intentions combine with specific external conditions to produce specific kamic trajectories. The Dalai Lama, in specific discussions of this framework with contemporary neuroscientists, has emphasized that Buddhism does not require either absolute determinism or absolute libertarian freedom. The Buddhist position is a specific middle way that recognizes the reality of causation while preserving the specific moral significance of intentional action. The framework fits contemporary science better than either extreme of the classical debate, and the traditional analysis has been productive in dialogue with contemporary neuroscience precisely because it was never committed to the specific metaphysical oppositions that the modern debate has inherited from its specific European context. The Hindu tradition developed its own specific framework through the doctrine of karma as articulated across the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the later philosophical schools. The Gita, in particular, in its specific dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, provides the locus classicus of the Hindu engagement with the fate and freedom question. Arjuna, facing the prospect of fighting and killing members of his own extended family, is paralyzed by the moral weight of the choice before him. Krishna's response develops across 18 chapters of sustained philosophical teaching. The specific teaching addresses the fate question at multiple levels. The outcomes of actions are not under the agent's control, but the actions themselves are. The specific verse that captures this teaching most famously is Bhagavad Gita 2:47. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but not to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself the cause of the results, and never be attached to not doing your duty. The teaching is not passivity. It is not resignation. It is a specific reorientation of the agent's relationship to their own action. The action is to be done. The agent should engage it fully. But the outcomes, whether the action succeeds or fails, whether the specific intended results occur, whether the agent is praised or blamed, these belong to the cosmic order, not to the agent. The agent should perform the appropriate action without attachment to its fruits. The results belong to the cosmic order, to dharma, to karma, to the specific unfolding that is not the agent's to determine. But the action belongs to the agent. The moral responsibility and the specific engagement with what must be done are the agent's genuine domain, even as the specific outcomes that flow from the action belong to the larger causal structure that the agent does not control. The specific Hindu analysis develops multiple categories of karma to capture this structure. Sanchita karma is the total accumulated karma from all past actions, the comprehensive record that shapes the current life's conditions. Prarabdha karma is the specific portion of sanchita karma that is currently being experienced, the specific conditions of the current life that the agent encounters without being able to change them. Kriyamana karma, or agami karma, is the karma currently being created through the agent's specific, present actions, the specific contributions the agent is making now to future conditions. The framework distinguishes what is fixed from what is being produced. The agent's circumstances, relationships, and specific conditions are largely the result of prarabdha karma that cannot be altered. The agent's response to those circumstances, the specific choices, specific intentions, specific actions, is kriyamana karma that is currently being created. Freedom and fate coexist in specific layered form, with different aspects of the agent's situation operating under different causal regimes. The Stoic tradition in the Greco-Roman world articulated a structurally similar framework through the concept of amor fati, the love of fate. The Stoics, particularly in the hands of Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, argued that the agent should accept what happens, the external events that are not under the agent's control, while cultivating excellence in the one domain that is under the agent's control, which is the agent's own response to events. Epictetus formulated this with characteristic precision. Some things are in our control, and others are not. In our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. Not in our control, our body, property, reputation, command, and, in a word, whatever are not our own actions. Epictetus, who had been born a slave and was later freed, developed this teaching from direct experience of radical constraint. The domain that cannot be taken from a person, one's own opinions, desires, and responses, is the domain of the agent's genuine freedom. Everything else is vulnerable to external circumstances that the agent does not control. Wisdom consists in the specific recognition of this distinction and the specific practice of focusing the agent's energies on the one domain that is genuinely the agent's own. Marcus Aurelius, writing his Meditations as Roman emperor, applied the same teaching from the opposite extreme of social circumstance, from the position of maximum power rather than maximum constraint. The emperor, despite his vast power over external events, was no more in control of the domain that Epictetus identified as the genuine field of freedom. The emperor's choices, like the slave's, were his own. The specific external outcomes that flowed from those choices belonged to the larger order. The wise person focuses on the domain of their own agency and releases attachment to the outcomes that depend on factors beyond it. The fate is accepted. The freedom within the fate is exercised fully. The Jewish tradition articulates its own specific framework through the doctrine of Bechira Kofshit, free choice, balanced with the specific reality of divine providence over the specific outcomes of history. The Talmudic dictum, all is foreseen, but freedom of choice is given, attributed to Rabbi Akiva, encapsulates the framework with characteristic conciseness. Both claims are affirmed. Both are considered true. Maimonides, the 12th century Jewish philosopher whose influence on Jewish thought is comparable to Aquinas' influence on Christian thought, developed the specific position that God's knowledge is so different in character from human knowledge that the apparent contradiction between divine foreknowledge and human freedom does not actually obtain. Our understanding of knowledge as a specific propositional relationship to specific facts does not apply to God. God knows in a mode we cannot fully comprehend, and the knowing does not constrain the freedom. The reconciliation is not provided as a theoretical framework, but is rather lived within as a specific religious orientation in which the agent exercises their freedom fully while recognizing that the larger outcomes belong to a providence that the agent does not fully comprehend. The Taoist tradition offers a specific framework through the concept of wu-wei effortless action that operates within the flow of the Tao. The sage does not impose specific plans on reality through willful effort. The sage aligns with the specific way that things are unfolding and acts in accordance with the natural flow. The specific outcomes that emerge are not the sage's doing in isolation from the Tao. They are the specific manifestations of the Tao through the sage who is aligned with its movement. Zhuangzi's image of the butcher, whose knife glides through the ox without encountering resistance because the butcher has learned to follow the natural grain of the ox's anatomy, captures the specific insight. Effective action is not action against the grain of reality. It is action with the grain, in which the agent's specific effort and the natural unfolding become indistinguishable. The indigenous traditions across the world articulate specific frameworks that share structural features with each of these sophisticated philosophical developments. The Lakota concept of mitakuye oyasin, all my relatives, places the individual agent within a relational web in which specific choices are specific contributions to a larger unfolding that no individual agent controls. The African traditions of ancestral guidance locate specific decisions within a temporal structure that includes the past of ancestors, the present of current agents, and the future of descendants, with the agency distributed across the relational structure rather than concentrated in the isolated individual. The Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime integrates the specific choices of current agents with the specific ongoing reality of ancestral events that continue to shape what can happen. The indigenous wisdom is not primitive supplement to more sophisticated frameworks. It articulates the same structural insight through specific cultural forms adapted to specific local conditions. The relational frameworks of these traditions may, in fact, be closer to the structure that contemporary physics and philosophical theology both require than the specific individualist frameworks that developed in post-Enlightenment Western thought. The convergence across these traditions is remarkable. Different cultural contexts, different metaphysical frameworks, different specific vocabularies, and yet the deepest formulations of each converge on a structurally similar claim. The future is, in some specific sense, already specific. Human agency is, in some specific sense, genuine. The apparent contradiction between these claims dissolves when the specific frameworks are articulated with sufficient precision, and the contemporary physics, approaching the same territory through radically different methods, has independently arrived at a structurally similar conclusion. The fourth part of this investigation will bring everything together: the physics, the neuroscience, the philosophical frameworks, and the traditions into a single integrated picture of what fate and freedom specifically are. We will examine the specific objections that still need to be addressed. We will trace the connections to every other investigation we have conducted, and we will articulate the specific practical implications for how you relate to your past, to your future, to the specific choices that constitute your specific life, and to the specific suffering and specific joy that the unfolding of that life will specifically contain. The future is already written, and also, in some specific sense, you are the one writing it. 3 investigations: the physics of the block universe, the neuroscience of the determined choice, and the contemplative traditions that have been articulating the specific reconciliation between fate and freedom for thousands of years. And the convergence produces a picture of what you are and what your future specifically is, that neither contemporary neuroscience nor classical theology alone has been able to articulate with full coherence. The physics established the structural framework, Einstein's special relativity in 1905, followed by Minkowski's geometric interpretation in 1908, established that space and time form a single 4-dimensional structure within which all moments past, present, and future are equally real. The Rietdijk-Putnam argument pushed this to its logical conclusion. The future of any specific observer is real, located at specific coordinates within the unified structure, with specific content that is already determinate. The delayed choice experiments in quantum mechanics, culminating in Yoon-Ho Kim's 2000 experiment, confirm that later events can influence earlier ones in ways that the classical picture of sequential causation cannot accommodate. The transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics, developed by John Cramer, provides a specific framework in which past and future participate in the specific transactions through which specific events occur, and the GPS satellites, the atomic clocks, the Harfele-Keating experiments, the muon lifetime measurements, the accumulated experimental evidence for special relativity confirms that the framework is not speculation, but the best confirmed description of physical reality we possess. The neuroscience established the challenge. Libet's 1,983 experiments, extended by Haynes in 2008, documented that specific brain activity precedes the conscious experience of deciding by substantial intervals. The readiness potential begins hundreds of milliseconds before subjects report making a decision. The fMRI detectable brain activity predicting a specific choice can be observed up to 10 seconds before the conscious awareness of deciding. Sapolsky's 2023 synthesis in Determined argues that these findings establish that free will cannot exist in any robust sense. Every action is the specific product of specific preceding causes, biological, psychological, environmental, that the agent did not choose and could not have chosen differently. The sense of free decision is, on this view, a specific illusion produced by a brain that lacks access to its own causal history. The philosophers and physicists responded with specific frameworks that challenge Sapolsky's conclusion without denying the neural findings. Compatibilism, defended by Maley and Dennett, argues that the free will that matters does not require indeterminism, that freedom is the specific capacity to act on one's own deliberative processes, and this capacity is entirely compatible with those processes being themselves causally determined. Robert Kane's libertarianism proposes that specific self-forming actions involve genuine quantum indeterminism at the neural level, with the agent's active participation constituting genuine authorship of the choice. Penrose and Hameroff's Auto-R theory provides a specific mechanism for quantum indeterminism in microtubules, with the 2022 Bandyopadhyay experimental findings offering empirical support. Henry Stapp's Process 1 and Process 2 framework distinguishes between the deterministic evolution of the quantum state and the specific act of conscious questioning that collapses the wave function, with Process 1 constituting the specific contribution of consciousness to physical outcomes. The integration produced a specific picture that went beyond either pure determinism or naive libertarianism. The future exists in the block universe sense. The specific content of the future is specific, but the specificity includes the specific contributions of specific agents whose specific choices are genuine. The agent's choice is not imposed from outside the specific causal structure. The agent's choice is part of the specific causal structure. The determination runs through the agent, not around the agent. And this framework, which the contemporary physics and neuroscience together produce, corresponds with remarkable precision to what the contemplative traditions have been articulating for thousands of years. The traditions provided the experiential depth and the practical wisdom. The Christian theology of divine foreknowledge and human freedom, articulated by Augustine, Boethius, Aquinas, Molina, and Eckhart, established that specific future events can be known without being coerced, that the eternal present contains all temporal moments without determining them from outside, and that the deepest ground of human agency is not separate from the divine reality in which all events are held. The Islamic tradition's engagement with qadar and kasb, developed across 14 centuries by al-Ghazali, Ibn Arabi, and others, established that divine decree and human responsibility are not opposed, that the specific acquisition of specific actions through specific intentions makes the human genuinely responsible, even as God remains the ultimate creator of all that occurs. The Buddhist analysis of pratitya-samutpada and cetana established that freedom is not transcendence of causation, but a specific mode of causation in which the agent's own nature is the specific proximate cause. The Hindu framework of karma, with its specific categories of sanchita, prarabdha, and kriyamana, established that fate and freedom operate at different levels simultaneously, with conditions fixed by past action, while current response remains genuinely open. The Stoic amor fati, the Jewish Talmudic, all is foreseen, but freedom of choice is given, the Taoist Wu Wei, all converge on the same structural insight. Fate and freedom are not opposed. They are complementary features of a unified reality. The picture that emerges is not a comfortable one in the superficial sense. It does not offer the reassurance that you are entirely in control of your life, nor the consolation that nothing you do matters because it is all predetermined anyway. It offers something more demanding and more genuine. a specific recognition that the specific life you are living is the specific contribution you are specifically making to a specific structure that specifically includes your specific participation. The recognition demands that you take your specific life seriously. It denies you the escape of either extreme, the fantasy of total control, or the surrender of total determinism. It places you in the specific middle ground, where genuine freedom and genuine constraint coexist, where your specific choices specifically matter precisely because they are specific features of a specific structure whose specific content includes them as constitutive elements. Now let us confront the objections. The first objection is the fatalism objection. If the future is written, then nothing I do matters. Whatever is going to happen will happen regardless of my choices. The agent might as well not try. Effort is pointless because the outcome is already determined. This objection fundamentally misreads the framework. The block universe is not fatalism. Fatalism holds that specific outcomes will occur regardless of what the agent does, that the agent's choices are irrelevant to what happens, because the outcomes are produced by external forces that bypass the agent entirely. The block universe view holds the opposite. The specific future is specific precisely because the specific agent specifically makes specific choices that specifically produce the specific outcomes. The agent's choices are not irrelevant, they are constitutive. Take away the specific choices, and the specific future would not be what it is, would, in fact, not exist as a specific region of the structure, because the specific choices are part of what makes the specific region specific. The fatalism objection confuses specificity with externality, but specificity does not imply externality. The specific future is specific through the specific agent's specific participation, not despite it. The second objection is the responsibility objection. If my choices are determined by factors I did not choose, by my genes, my upbringing, my neural architecture, the specific conditions that existed before I was born, then I cannot be morally responsible for what I do. Sapolsky takes this line to its radical conclusion. If the causal chain determining my actions extends back to conditions I did not choose, then I am not the ultimate author of my actions, and moral responsibility in the traditional sense cannot be sustained. This objection has genuine force, but the response requires recognizing that the traditional notion of moral responsibility never actually required the kind of metaphysical independence that Sapolsky's critique assumes. The compatibilists have been making this point for decades. Moral responsibility requires that actions arise from the specific deliberative processes of the specific agent, that they reflect the specific values and specific character of the specific person, that they express what the person specifically is. The causal history that produced the agent is not morally relevant to this. What is morally relevant is whether the action, here and now, is the specific expression of the specific agent. If it is, the agent is morally responsible, regardless of how the agent came to be the specific agent they are. The Buddhist analysis makes this point with particular clarity. Cetana intention is the locus of moral responsibility. The specific intentional content of the specific action generates the specific karmic consequences. The intentional content arises from specific conditions, yes, but it arises as the specific intentional content that specifically constitutes the action. The responsibility is in the intention, and the intention is genuinely the agent's intention, even though the intention's specific content arises from specific prior conditions. Responsibility is preserved not by denying causation, but by recognizing that the agent's own nature is part of the causal structure that generates the action. The third objection is the existential objection. Even if the philosophical framework can be made coherent, the felt experience of facing an unknown future, of making genuinely open choices, of having one's life genuinely in one's hands, is essential to human existence. The block universe framework, if taken seriously, would undermine this existential experience and thereby diminish human life. The framework, whatever its theoretical merits, is incompatible with the phenomenology of being a person. This objection points at something real but draws the wrong conclusion. The phenomenology of facing the future, making choices, and experiencing oneself as an agent is not threatened by the block universe framework. The phenomenology continues to be what it is. What the framework does is provide a specific interpretation of what the phenomenology specifically is. The agent experiences deliberation as open because, from within the agent's perspective, the outcome has not yet been reached. The openness is real. It is the specific epistemic situation of an agent embedded within the structure, from whose perspective the future regions of the structure are not directly accessible. The openness is also specific. It is the specific openness of the specific agent's specific epistemic perspective, not the ontological openness of an undetermined future. Both features coexist. The phenomenology is preserved. The metaphysics is clarified. Now, let us trace the connections. The time illusion investigation established that time does not flow in the way ordinary experience suggests, that the passage of time is a feature of perspective rather than a feature of reality itself. The fate investigation builds directly on this. If time does not flow, then the future does not arrive. The future simply is, at its specific location, in the unified structure. And the apparent flow of time from past to future to a present that continuously becomes past is a feature of how specific observers traverse the structure, not a feature of the structure itself. The retrocausality investigation documented that future events can influence past ones in ways that classical causation cannot account for. The fate investigation extends this. If retrocausality is real, then the specific content of the future is not merely something that will occur as a consequence of present causes. The future also participates in shaping the present through the specific bidirectional influences that the delayed choice experiments have documented. The agent's present choices are not only causes of future outcomes, they are also, in some specific sense, effects of future realities that participate in producing the specific present moment of deciding. The free will investigation established that Process 1, the conscious selection of templates from quantum superpositions, is the specific mechanism through which consciousness participates in actualizing specific outcomes. The fate investigation applies this. The specific future that the block universe contains includes the specific Process 1 contributions of the specific conscious agents whose specific selections shape the specific content. The future is not external to the agents. It is constituted, in part, by the specific agent's specific participation in its actualization. The information precedence investigation established that reality is fundamentally informational. The fate investigation extends this. The specific information that constitutes the specific future is preserved information, information that is already present in the informational substrate of reality, whether or not any specific observer has direct access to it. What appears to the observer as the openness of the future is the specific informational inaccessibility of regions that are nevertheless informationally determinate. The laws of existence investigation, the three rules that observation creates reality. Nothing is separate, and information cannot be destroyed provides the theoretical foundation. The fate investigation applies each law. The first law implies that specific future events require specific future observations. The second law implies that the specific future is not separable from the specific present agents who participate in producing it. The third law implies that the specific content of the specific future is, in the deepest sense, information that cannot be destroyed, information that is already preserved in the structure, awaiting specific access from specific observational locations. The memory investigation established that the past is preserved in dimensions of reality that ordinary perception does not directly access. The fate investigation extends this across temporal directions. Just as the past persists, so the future exists. The structure contains both directions, and the same considerations that make access to the past possible through specific contemplative practices make access to the future, in some limited forms, available through specific altered states that the traditions have documented. The precognitive capacities that advanced meditators have reported across traditions, the prophetic experiences documented across religious histories, the specific intuitive glimpses of what will come that the presentiment research has begun to document in the laboratory. The synchronicity investigation documented that meaningful coincidences between inner states and outer events challenge conventional causation. The fate investigation connects what presents as synchronicity may be specific perceptions of the specific way the specific future is structured, the specific alignments between specific present moments and specific future events that the block universe makes coherent. The meaningful coincidence is not magical. It is the specific recognition that the specific moment you are in is specifically connected to specific future realities that are already present in the structure, producing the specific sense of significance that mere coincidence does not produce. The karma investigation established that intentional actions leave informational traces that affect future circumstances. The fate investigation clarifies what this specifically means in the block universe context. The specific traces are not separate from the specific future they affect. The traces and the effects are equally real, equally present in the structure, with specific causal relationships running through the structure that make specific futures, specifically the futures of specific pasts. Your specific karmic identity is not a package of potentials waiting to unfold. It is a specific pattern in the unified structure, with specific future consequences that are already as real as the specific past actions that specifically shape them. The intuition investigation established that information can reach consciousness through non-local channels. The fate investigation connects. Some of what presents as intuition may be specific access to specific regions of the future, flickering into present awareness as the specific feeling about what will happen that the trained intuitive can distinguish from mere anxious projection. The presentiment experiments of Radin and Mossbridge document specific physiological responses to future events that precede the events by several seconds. If the effect generalizes, if the access can be cultivated and extended, then specific practices can extend the agent's specific access from the immediate future into more distant regions of the preserved structure. Every thread connects. The investigations, taken together, produce a picture of reality in which specific past events persist, specific future events are real, specific present observers participate in actualizing specific regions of the structure through their specific choices, and specific contemplative practices can cultivate specific forms of access to regions of the structure that ordinary perception does not provide. The practical applications of this framework are immediate and significant. The practical applications extend into specific orientations that transform specific features of lived experience. These applications are not separate from the theoretical framework. They are the specific ways in which the theoretical framework specifically shows up in the specific texture of specific living. The first application is the transformation of anxiety about the future. The specific dread of what might happen, the fear that some catastrophic event is lurking ahead, waiting to descend on you, presupposes that the future is an external threat that could do things to you against your will. The framework transforms this. The specific future contains specific events, yes. But the events are not externalities that will happen to a passive you. They are the specific outcomes that your specific present orientations, choices, and actions will specifically participate in producing. Your present relationship to your future is not the relationship of a passive recipient to external fate. It is the relationship of a specific participating agent whose specific present engagement is constitutive of what the specific future will be. The practical effect of this reframing for agents who genuinely internalize it can be substantial. The anxious projection of specific feared futures, the mental rehearsal of disasters that have not yet occurred and may never occur, loses its grip when the agent recognizes that the specific future is not a random threat, but a specific outcome that specifically depends on the specific present engagement. The energy that would have been absorbed by anxious projection becomes available for the specific present engagement itself. The agent is not distracted from the specific task by the specific fear of what might happen. The specific fear is contained within the specific recognition that the specific future is the agent's specific participation, not the agent's specific passive exposure. This does not eliminate uncertainty. Your specific access to future regions of the structure is limited, and the specific outcomes depend on specific factors you cannot fully anticipate. But it reframes the uncertainty. The uncertainty is epistemic, not ontological. The future is specific. Your not yet knowing of the specific content is the specific perspective you occupy, not a feature of the reality that the specific content constitutes. The second application is the transformation of regret. The specific pain of wishing you had chosen differently in some specific moment of your past presupposes that the alternative choice was genuinely available to the agent you then were. The framework clarifies this. The specific you that you specifically were at the specific previous moment was the specific agent that specifically existed at that moment. That specific agent with the specific values, specific information, specific conditions that constituted that agent specifically produced the specific choice that actually occurred. A different choice would have required a different agent, different values, different information, different conditions. The different agent did not exist. The different choice was not, therefore, a genuinely available alternative for the specific agent you specifically were. Regret is still appropriate where the agent, here and now, would choose differently than the past agent did. But regret loses its specifically tortured quality when the agent recognizes that the past choice was the specific choice that the specific past agent specifically made, given the specific conditions that specifically existed. The third application is the transformation of the relationship to death, the specific certainty that you will die, the specific awareness that a specific ending is waiting somewhere in the future of your specific life, is the central existential fact that shapes much of human experience. The framework reframes this. Your death is a specific event located at a specific point in the unified structure of your life. It is not a threat approaching from outside. It is a specific region of your own specific existence, as real as the region you currently occupy. The death is there. It is also not here. This reframing does not soften the specific human difficulty of facing mortality. The specific terror that death has produced in human consciousness, for as long as human consciousness has existed, is not eliminated by a specific philosophical reorientation. But the reframing does offer something. The specific death that awaits you is not a catastrophic annihilation of everything you have been. It is a specific boundary of the specific region of the structure that constitutes your specific life. Everything you have been, everything you have loved, everything you have done, every specific person whose specific life intersected with yours, every specific place that held you for a specific time, every specific joy you specifically felt, every specific sorrow you specifically survived. These are not destroyed at the moment of death. They persist at their specific locations in the structure, with the full specific reality they had when they specifically occurred. The specific you that is reading these words will, at a specific future moment, not be reading them. That moment is specific. It is also not the moment you occupy now. Both features coexist, and the appropriate orientation toward death is neither denial nor terror, but the specific acceptance that the event belongs to the specific structure of your specific life, constituting the specific extent of your specific existence rather than negating it. The traditions have been articulating specific practices for cultivating this orientation. The memento mori of the Christian contemplative tradition, the deliberate remembrance of death that monks have cultivated for centuries, is not morbid preoccupation, but specific practice, aimed at integrating the specific reality of death into the specific texture of ordinary life. The Buddhist Maranasati mindfulness of death is a specific meditation that recognizes the specific certainty of the agent's own ending without falling into either denial or paralysis. The Sufi traditions of remembering the specific moment of death include specific practices of contemplating one's own corpse, one's own tomb, one's own decomposition practices that would strike the modern reader as morbid, but that the traditions have found to produce specific psychological effects of peace and specific moral effects of ethical reorientation. These practices work because they integrate the specific reality of death into the specific awareness of the specific agent, transforming the specific relationship to what lies ahead. The fourth application is the transformation of the relationship to your loved ones. The specific people you love are located at specific positions in the specific structure of your life. The specific time you have with them is specific. It has specific beginnings and specific endings, specific intensities and specific duration. The recognition that these specific moments are located in a specific structure that preserves them, rather than consuming them as they pass, transforms the specific quality of the engagement. The specific conversation with your parent, which you experience as happening in a specific present moment, is not a transient event that will evaporate into vanished past. It is a specific region of the structure that will continue to be specifically real at its specific location, regardless of the eventual separation that death will specifically bring. The specific love you have for the specific people you love is not being consumed by time. It is being gathered by time, incorporated into the specific structure of the specific life you are specifically living together. The fifth application is the transformation of the relationship to suffering. The specific pain that you will experience, whether physical, emotional, or existential, is located at specific points in the specific structure of your specific life. It is already real in some specific sense. It will be experienced when the specific moment comes. And the framework offers no illusion that the suffering can be avoided through specific choices that bypass it. What the framework offers is a specific reorientation. The suffering is specific. It is also located within a specific structure that contains, in addition to the suffering, the specific love, specific meaning, specific beauty that also populate the specific extent of your specific existence. The whole is real. The suffering is one region within the whole. The framework does not diminish the suffering. It contextualizes it within the larger specific reality to which the suffering belongs. And this is where the framework reaches the existential depth that the purely theoretical formulations do not fully capture. You are not moving toward your future. You are gathering it. Each specific moment you live is a specific region of the structure that preserves, in its specific reality, what you have been and what you are and what you will be. The structure is not something that is happening to you. The structure is what you specifically are across the full, specific extent of your specific existence. Your specific joys are there at their specific locations. Your specific sorrows are there at their specific locations. Your specific loves, your specific losses, your specific triumphs, your specific failures, all of them specifically populate the specific structure that constitutes the specific life you specifically live. Consider what this means. The specific childhood you remember, the specific feeling of a specific summer afternoon when you were 7, the specific quality of specific light in a specific kitchen, the specific laugh of a specific person now long gone is not vanished. It is there, at its specific location in the structure. The specific love you once felt for someone who died, that specific love is not in the past tense. It is at its specific location, with the specific reality it had when it specifically existed. The specific moment when you felt, with specific intensity, that you were finally understanding something that had eluded you for years, that specific moment is still what it was, still there, still real at its specific coordinates in the unified structure. Nothing is being taken from you. Everything is being gathered. The specific anxieties that dominate ordinary human existence, the fear of the future, the regret over the past, the dread of death, the specific terror of specific sufferings that may lie ahead, all of these anxieties presuppose a specific relationship to time and to outcome that the framework reveals as specifically inaccurate. The time does not flow. The outcomes do not arrive. The future does not loom. The structure simply is, with you specifically occupying your specific region of it, and with every other region of your specific existence equally real, equally present in the deeper sense, equally a specific part of the specific whole that is you. This does not eliminate the specific character of specific moments. The moment of loss is genuinely painful. The moment of joy is genuinely beautiful. The specific textures of specific experiences are not diminished by the recognition that the moments are specifically located within a specific structure. The specificity is preserved. The moments retain their specific reality, but the relationship of the specific present to the specific future is transformed. The future is not a threat. The future is you, at a different specific location in the specific structure that you specifically are, and the specific practices that can deepen the specific access to this recognition, the contemplative disciplines the traditions have refined across millennia, are available to specific agents willing to commit to the specific, sustained engagement that the practices require. The meditator who cultivates awareness of the timeless dimension of reality begins, over years of practice, to relate to specific present moments as specific regions of a larger, unified structure, rather than as transient events that will disappear into a vanished past. The practitioner of contemplative prayer cultivates the capacity to rest in the specific awareness that the traditions have called the eternal present, within which all specific moments are gathered. The Sufi who practices the remembrance of death develops the specific relationship to personal mortality that integrates the specific ending into the specific texture of the specific living. The commitment is not trivial. The meditator who begins a serious practice commits to years of daily engagement. The contemplative who enters a contemplative tradition commits to a lifetime of specific disciplines, but the practices are specifically available. The traditions have preserved them. The methodologies have been refined across millennia of sustained use, and the specific agent willing to commit to the specific practice can, over specific years, cultivate specific capacities that ordinary consciousness does not possess. These practices work. The documented effects in sustained practitioners across traditions are not speculative consolations. They are specific transformations of the specific relationship to time, to future, to death, to the specific unfolding that the framework identifies as the deepest reality of human existence. The practices are available, the transformations are available, and the specific commitment required to cultivate them is a specific choice that specific agents can specifically make within the specific conditions of specific ordinary lives. The fate question, when it is asked with full seriousness, is the question of what you are going to do with the specific life that is specifically yours. Is the future already written? Yes, in one specific sense, and no, in another specific sense. The future is specific, it has specific content that is already determinate. But the specific content is the specific content your specific choices will specifically produce. You are not waiting for fate to happen to you. You are specifically writing, through your specific choices at this specific moment, the specific fate that will specifically be yours. Every moment you are alive, you are writing. Every specific choice you make, every specific action you take, every specific thought you specifically think, all of them are specific contributions to the specific structure that you specifically are, across the full specific extent of your specific existence. The writing is not optional, it is what it means to be alive. The question is not whether you will write, the question is what you will write, within the specific conditions that the specific moment provides. The writing is happening now, the book is always being written, and the specific you that is reading these words is, in this specific moment, specifically engaged in the specific writing of the specific existence that specifically constitutes you across the specific full extent of your specific life. The future is written. You are the one writing it. The specific conditions of the specific moment you now occupy are not obstacles to the writing. They are the specific materials the writing specifically requires, the specific limitations you face, the specific resources you possess, the specific people you specifically encounter, the specific challenges that specifically confront you. All of these are the specific conditions within which the specific writing takes place. The meaning is not in transcending the conditions. The meaning is in the specific quality of the specific engagement within them. The fate question, at its deepest, is a question about how you will live, not whether the living will produce specific outcomes you can control. Because specific outcomes depend on specific factors you cannot fully control, but how you will engage the specific moments that specifically present themselves to you across the specific extent of your specific life. The engagement is yours. It is not produced by external forces that bypass your specific participation. It is produced by you through the specific exercise of the specific capacities you specifically possess. The specific capacities include attention, which you can cultivate, compassion, which you can develop, wisdom, which grows through specific practice, love, which is available at specific moments when you are willing to extend it. These are the specific materials of the specific writing. And the specific quality of the specific life you specifically live is the specific quality of the specific engagement these specific materials specifically produce. The universe has already inscribed the tablet, but the ink is your specific participation, your specific attention, your specific choices in specific moments. Without your specific contribution, the inscription would not be what it is. With your specific contribution, the inscription is what it is. The specific fate is specific. You are the specific one writing it. Your choices matter. The framework does not diminish them. The framework reveals what they specifically are. You cannot escape the specific extent of your specific existence. You can only engage it. The specific quality of the specific engagement is the specific contribution your specific life makes to the specific structure that specifically constitutes what you specifically are. Right, well,